The easiest example of this is to point to the fact that we said that there are islands with no inhabitants currently terrifying us. That's clearly not true. There's nobody there.
In our prisons, prisoners can be reached by our lawyers, by our courts, by our mercy. In El Salvador, they cannot. Let me tell you one of their names, one of their stories, as best we know it. Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia is from El Salvador. His mother, Cecilia, ran a pupuseria in San Salvador. A local gang, Barrio 18, began extorting the business, demanding monthly and then weekly payments. If the family didn't pay, Barrio 18 threatened to murder Kilmar's brother, Cesar, or rape their sisters. Eventually, Barrio 18 demanded Cesar join their gang.
Just so we're clear, I'm guessing if Trump sends a U.S. citizen to El Salvador, that's game, right? Like, that's it? I mean, he's already sent somebody to the Supreme Court, and now the lower court is telling them they have to bring back, and they're saying they're not going to do it. People keep trying to say that it's going to be over when this happens or this happens, but we're already there. We're already there, because it's not going to be a citizen. It's going to be a naturalized citizen who doesn't count as a real citizen, or it's going to be a citizen born to two immigrant parents who should have never been granted citizenship in the first place, or it's going to be somebody who was naturalized but it was on a U.S. base, or they were born on a U.S. base. It's going to be some bullshit like that. There's always going to be an excuse for why it doesn't count.
At which point the family sent Cesar to America. Then Barrio 18 demanded the same of Kilmar. And Kilmar, at age 16, was sent to America too. This was around 2011. This is what we mean when we say he entered illegally. A 16-year-old fleeing the only home he's ever known, afraid for his life. Abrego Garcia's life here just seems to have been a life, not an easy one. He lived in Maryland, he worked in construction. He met a woman, her name is Jennifer, a US citizen. She had 2 children from a past relationship. One has epilepsy, the other autism. In 2019, they had a child together. That child is deaf in one ear and also has autism. Jennifer was pregnant in 2019. On the day, Abrego Garcia dropped one kid off at school, dropped the other off with a babysitter, and drove to Home Depot to try to find construction work. He was arrested for loitering outside Home Depot.
Wait, how does the Supreme Court hold the Trump admin in criminal contempt while also saying he has criminal immunity? Because it's not holding the entire Trump admin in contempt, and it's not holding even President Trump in contempt. It's particular people in the administration that were involved in lying about or not delivering whatever information the court needed.
Jennifer was pregnant in 2019. On the day, Abrego Garcia dropped one kid off at school, dropped the other off with a babysitter, and drove to Home Depot to try to find construction work. He was arrested for loitering outside Home Depot, asked if he was a gang member. He said no, and he's put into ICE detention. The story gets stranger from here. About 4 hours after he's picked up, and that appears to be the first contact he's ever had with local police, a detective produces an allegation, citing a confidential informant, that Abrego Garcia is actually a gang member. Abrego Garcia has no criminal record, not one here, not one in El Salvador.
Does Abrego Garcia have domestic violence charges towards him, now that it matters? No, he does not. That's not true.
Abrego Garcia has no criminal record, not one here, not one in El Salvador. He was accused, strangely, of being part of a gang that operates in New York, a state that he has never lived in. Whoever produced the allegation, they were never cross-examined. And when Abrego Garcia's attorney tried to get more information, he was told that the detective behind the accusation had been suspended, and the officers in the gang unit would not speak to him. Abrego Garcia's partner, Jennifer, said she was, quote, shocked when the government said he should stay detained because Kilmar is an MS-13 gang member. Kilmar is not and has never been a gang member, I'm certain of that. In June of 2019, while Abrego Garcia was still detained, he and Jennifer got married, exchanging rings to an officer separated by a pane of glass. Later that year, a judge ruled that Abrego Garcia could not be deported back to El Salvador because he might be murdered by Barrio 18, that his fear was credible. Abrego Garcia was then set free. Each year since then, he has checked in with immigration authorities. He's been employed as a sheet metal apprentice. He's a member of the local union. He was studying for a vocational license at University of Maryland. There is no evidence anywhere, offered by anyone, that has suggested Abrego Garcia poses a threat to anyone in this country. But on March 12th, Abrego Garcia was pulled over while driving, his 5-year-old in the backseat. He was told his immigration status had changed. On March 15th, in defiance of the 2019 court ruling, Abrego Garcia was flown to El Salvador and imprisoned at CCOT as a terrorist. It was a mistake.
The Trump administration is now acknowledging they wrongly deported an immigrant to that notorious prison in El Salvador, calling it
an administrative error.
An administrative error.
A clerical error. It was an administrative error.
Mistakenly deporting a Maryland father.
This so-called administration error has destroyed my family's happiness, my children's innocence.
I want to read to you from the editorial of the National Review.
Destiny ends his monologue with the question, what happens when it's a citizen? And honestly, that's the real moment. That's the heartbeat of everything he just said. And it's why this reaction exists, because he's right, not kind of right, not halfway right, like 90% right. This isn't a hostile rebuttal. It's a surgical agreement with some attached explosives. So yes, Destiny, I think about that question too. What happens when it's not Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Salvadoran teenager who fled extortion gangs and ended up in Maryland? What happens when it's a naturalized citizen, or the child of immigrants, or someone born on a U.S. base? What happens when the machine decides they don't count anymore? Because that's where this is going. And unlike the earlier parts of your monologue that danced around racial profiling or family trauma, that's the line no one wants to admit we've already crossed. And we probably didn't even do it with a human decision. You didn't mention this in the video, but let's bring it in now because it's central to understanding how something like Kilmar's deportation even happened in 2025. The Department of Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Enforcement are plugged directly into Palantir Technologies, the same predictive surveillance company that helped track insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan. Through their system called Falcon, which stands for the Federated and Learning Cohort Object Network, ICE agents don't just pull up a database, they run analytics, visual networks, and predictive flags based on integrated risk scores. Falcon plugs into other federal systems through something called DOGE, not the meme coin, but a Department of Government Enterprises framework that acts as a mega API connecting IRS tax records, Social Security Administration files, DMV data, and biometric profiles into a single search window for law enforcement. That's how these systems work now. One cross-match, one algorithmic false positive, one automated status flag, and a human being gets disappeared under the words status changed. Destiny, you quoted that line too. He was told his immigration status had changed. No judge, no motion to reopen, no appeal, just a change, like flipping a switch on a spreadsheet. But that's the problem. That's not immigration enforcement. That's executive erasure. And whether it was an agent or an AI that made the call, the Constitution doesn't disappear just because a software tool says you're statistically unsafe. You said that Kilmar was picked up loitering outside a Home Depot, and you framed it like it was his first contact with police, as if that should matter. But here's the thing, it doesn't. By the time it mattered, in late 2019, an immigration judge had already reviewed Kilmar's history and ruled he could not be deported to El Salvador. That ruling was not symbolic. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the law. And Trump's DHS ignored it. That's the outrage. Not that he was stopped in 2019, not that a detective wrote something in a file, not that a confidential informant accused him of being part of a gang that operates in New York, a state Kilmar had never lived in. None of that mattered once the judge ruled. And yet, years later, they claimed his status had changed and shipped him to Seacot Prison in El Salvador, a place you rightly describe as outside the reach of American courts, mercy, or even lawyers. You said it clearly. In our prisons, prisoners can be reached by our lawyers, by our courts, by our mercy. In El Salvador, they cannot. And that's the heart of the violation. Even if you think El Salvador's prison system is valid for actual gang members, which is a different debate entirely. Kilmar wasn't tried. He wasn't reprocessed. He was just gone. You also laid out his life in America. Union sheet metal apprentice, married, raising kids, enrolled at the University of Maryland. And I want to be clear here. I don't care about any of that in terms of whether someone deserves to stay, but I absolutely care when those details directly contradict a smear campaign that tried to paint him as an active, dangerous gang member. If Trump had real evidence, he could have brought it to court. He didn't. And when someone gets disappeared without giving a judge a chance to review new evidence, that's not deportation, it's rendition. As for your confusion about how the Supreme Court could hold administration officials in contempt while also recognizing Trump's criminal immunity, let me clear that up. Trump, as president, is immune from prosecution unless and until he's impeached, whether he's in office or not. That's not a loophole. That's how the system was designed. But the cabinet, they're not immune. They're fully liable. The problem is that no one's going to prosecute them because the Department of Justice won't charge its own people. So yes, you're right to sense the hypocrisy, but it's not confusion. It's performance. It's accountability theater. You get contempt rulings because the court needs to look like it's still in charge, but it's not. Not when the executive ignores it and nothing happens. You did throw in one line about islands tariffing us that I'll ignore because it was dumb, but most of what you said, again, is dead on. I'd say I agree with 90% of your monologue, Destiny, more than most people probably do. But the remaining 10% isn't just disagreement, it's the difference between telling the story and understanding the system. You're right to ask what happens when it's a citizen. But what you didn't say is this: the system doesn't need to wait for it to be a citizen. The system just needs one bad flag, one algorithmic match, one status update, and no one will come to fix it because once you're gone, you're gone.